So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Kihei Charter School. My name is Kevin Curry, and I'm the president of the Waimea High District Neighborhood Association. What that is we're an organization that's dedicated to the education and the improvement of the local community in our district, in our area. It's about a 10-block zone between Wailakahau and Kupuna Street, from South Kihei Road all the way up to the church. And we get involved with getting to know one another and trying to improve our little patch of paradise. So we're really excited to have such powerful speakers here tonight and to be able to bring the South Maui community some great information and to inform us on what's going on in our district and what's current so that we can make a change in our community. So tonight, I would like to get things started in a very Hawaiian way, and that would be to have a pule by Daniel Kihei.
Eko mako makua I loko o kalani. E wana ia ka inoa. Mahalo ke kua. We give thee thanks for this community outreach, and for those who have organized it, and for those who will participate in the panel for the purpose of building awareness about issues that are related to our mountains, our gulches, our nearshore waters, our oceans, our homes here in this beautiful island. We humbly ask, Keakua, that thou will bless those who are moderating tonight's meeting, as well as those who have prepared to speak to us, that they might be able to share all those things they want to impart unto us. We ask that thou open our hearts and minds, that we might be able to receive this information, and that we might be able to determine how best to use it as individuals, as families, and as community members, that as action is required, that action may be taken, that we may feel safe in our homes, in our communities. Mahalo ke kua for all these blessings. Bless those who have not yet arrived, that they may arrive safely, and then when the meeting's over, please take us home to our destinations in safety. We humbly pray. Maka inoa o ke keke hemolele o Yesu Christo. Amen.
As we get started, I think I'd like just to educate myself as well as the panel of the audience as to who we have here today. And I'd like to start over here on your left. This is Mr. R.C. Sinnott. He's a retired U.S. Army physician, a radiologist, and also a military colonel. I've got to give R.C. A great deal of accolades because he worked tirelessly with the Maui County and the County Council and kept asking questions and wanting to know the accuracy of what is happening with our floodplain and our mapping. And it wasn't long after that where things got moving along, and now we have a new floodplain map that we're going to be discussing today. So I really appreciate the work that you've done. You're going to be talking a lot about some of the things that are still questions as we proceed forward in that direction. And then we also have Mr. Dudley DePonte. And Dudley, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? You've been on Maui for how long?
Long time. About 59 years. I've been doing surveying for 39 years. I live up on Crater Road, which is at 4,041 point somewhat feet. In any case, I'm above the floodplain, so I feel, okay. But my concern and why I'm here is I was one of the persons that called FEMA and tried to address more on studying this Keokeo Gouch because it wasn't quite right, and it's still not quite right as I'm listening to some of the other people doing their studies. So I respect the studies. My experience is basically I've lived here, 59 years of it, or 5 years less, 54.
That's great. And you will be a great resource when we show pictures of some of these maps. Feel free and chime in and give us your background in terms from a surveyor's standpoint and also from a historian who's worked in this industry for this long to know the history of the land, the ownership of the land, how it's been used, how it impacts us. And I think you bring a great deal of insight to the panel. And then we have, of course, back with us again, Ms. Lucienne Dene, who boy, you could go on, but just most recently tell us about some of the work you've been doing.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to Waimahaihai Community Neighborhood Association for presenting this opportunity. My name is Lucienne Dene. I saw in your literature I was billed as representing Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, and I do proudly serve on that council, but actually the research I've done that I usually present is for Maui Tomorrow. So you'll see my slideshow has the Maui Tomorrow logo on it. I am a researcher in water issues and in historical issues. And I was ably prepared to do this by just being a curious person. And I was an English major in college and just never thought I'd end up devoting my life to research and reading dry technical reports and old, historical documents and land deeds and things. But indeed, when you do, it's pretty fascinating. So my work usually involves educational projects and advocating for parks and open spaces. I'm one of the co-founders of the Hawaiian Island Land Trust, formerly the Maui Coastal Land Trust. So I really want to see our legacy perpetuated in our open spaces, and that's good for drainage too.
So without further ado, I think without flipping a coin, I think we should find out who's up first, and that would be Lucienne. And take it away, and we'll have somebody on slides. Great.
Thank you. And can we have our lights dimmed as well, because I think folks will be able to see a little better. Well, the whole purpose of starting off with the history of what's in our backyard is this basic premise that it's hard to plan the future without knowing what came before us. And Kihei especially has a rich history, but it's not always very well known. For instance, a lot of people don't know that Kula Kai is another name for what we call Kihei today. Kihei was only a small area near where the Kihei boat ramp, the Kihei wharf, and what's now, I guess, the ABC store, the old Suda store was. But Kula Kai means Kula, or the plains, the dry plains at the sea. And Upper Kula that we know today and Lower Kula that we call Kihei were actually all one district at one time, and one moku, or one administrative district. And we can see that right now most of Kula Kai is by the Kai, but we're starting to kind of move up the mountain a little bit. We have some facilities up there. We have the Monsanto facility. We have the new police station over here. This is an old slide. We have a sewage treatment plant, a compost area, base yard, golf course, high-tech center. So we are moving up the mountain, and so it's important to know kind of how this whole land was utilized back in the day. If you lived in traditional Hawaiian times, the 1400s, the 1500s, the 1600s, you would know your way by the landmarks. And I'm sorry, the lighting isn't so good on this, but one of the most prominent landmarks in all of Kihei is that big red hill you see when you look uphill above the high-tech center, or pretty much any place from North Kihei. And that hill is called Pu'okali, or we call it Red Hill. But Pu'okali was actually a mythological figure, a mo'o goddess. And she gave birth to a daughter that eventually became what we know as Pu'olai, or the hill at McKenna State Park. Waimahaihai itself was a traditional community located right down where the Kihei Library is now on Waimahaihai Street. That's a very aptly named street. And it's right on the boundary. This is an Ahupua'a boundary, this line. And the village of Waimahaihai was right on the boundary where two Ahupua'as, Kiokea and Kamaole, met. And so the village itself was in the Kamaole side, but things that are on boundaries, there's reasons for them. They're usually a trade center and easy to have people from both sides of the boundary have interaction with each other. There's some other interesting place names that are kind of being forgotten now. This is the Makai end of Lipoa Street on old maps, like from that 1880s maps, was called Kulamoi Malia. Now on maps, current maps, it's called Laie, and there's some wetlands nearby that are called the Laie wetlands. What some people may not know is there was actually a fish pond here, and when the tide is low, you can kind of see the outline of it. The Kulamoi Malia community may have actually been built around what is now the wetland by St. Teresa's Church, and also called the Laie wetland, because we know that Kulakai, Kihei, had many freshwater ponds, and that's why there was a thriving community here, and all of the fish ponds that we see today that were built like in the 1400s and 1500s. So different settlement times, different settlement patterns. Kihei actually had not just the fish pond that we're all familiar with at Kalepo-Lepo, the Kui'ie fish pond that's by the whale sanctuary there and Mahoney Shores, but it had 3 other fish ponds, the remains of all of which can be seen, especially if you fly over. So what this tells us is it takes a lot of labor to build a fish pond, and it takes a chiefly presence. So there was really a structure here that was managing the fisheries and managing life for the people. And of course, fishing and gathering remains a very, very important cultural use here. Waipuilani Gulch, which is prominently featured right in here, drains into one of these fish ponds. You can kind of see the outline. Ko'onaulu Gulch, or Kulani Hakoi, which is the next one up, also drains into the fish pond at Kui'ie. And these other gulches each have a wetlands or something to receive them at the ends. And this is a map. It's a little hard to show the yellow here, but these were wetlands as of the 1960s. Kihei had a ton of wetlands. I came here in 1972, and Sherman maybe remembers from back those days. There were all these just old fields with kiawe and scrub bush in them and stuff. And when it rained, they just all flooded. They were all functioning as wetlands. Now we know the wetlands from the ones behind Azeka Plaza, which were actually kind of constructed. By the 1990s, the wetlands had shrunk quite a bit. And of course, by today, they've shrunk even more. Wetlands are places that get filled in. For frame of reference, this is Lipoa Street here. So the wetlands in green are what still existed in 1991, and the ones in yellow were ones that got filled in between 1991 and 2000. So we're at 2014. There's been a little bit more filling, and of course the mitigation were the 2 that were created through the Azeka Plaza, and I think there was one other little one too in that same area. Anyway, we've lost a lot of our wetland capacity, and yet our gulches still continue to flow. We have a lot of major drainage ways in the Kihei area, and some are larger and some are smaller. But you can see right here where a lot of the fish ponds were located, were some very prominent waterways, and so those two always go hand in hand. Over here in the Kamaole Keokea area, there still are some pretty robust gulches. Keokea Gulch, a gulch that's called Kalua Ihakoko, and then there's Kailiholo Gulch and Kamaole Gulch. So today, because some of the wetland capacity is lost, we still have areas that, that just function as wetlands, but we also have a lot of flooding of our ocean waters and of our homes and businesses. And this persists all the way. This is at Lipoa Street here, but it persists all the way down when we have the big rains. Back to our history. Back in the 1880s, our maps show that there actually was a settlement here in Waimahaihai. These little dots are representative of house sites and possibly some walls, and then a heiau is also marked. We also see there was a coconut grove at Kalua Ihakoko, and there was a settlement there as well. Today we call that Charlie Young Beach, that area, and who wouldn't want to live there, right? It's nice. The fishing shrine, or heiau, that was marked on that map was restored in the 1990s. It was first documented, it still actually existed in the 1920s. Then it was forgotten by time. This was all state land. It was covered by garbage and, overridden with this and that. And fortunately, when the library was built, a very dedicated archaeologist, Teresa Donham, did some research, talked to some old timers, and helped restore it, gathered the materials that were on site and restored it. You'll notice the traditional ku'ula stone. This is a stone that the fishermen would go to and offer their prayers for a safe fishing expedition and of course, a good catch. This is the plaque for the koa. It's called the koa I Kamaole because it's in the Kamaole Ahupua'a. We don't know any other actual traditional name for it. This koa actually had several terraces, and it was pretty extensive, but they several of them had to be sacrificed during the construction of the library. This also, hard to imagine, but where the Kihei fire station is, which is right next door to the library, just immediately Mauka, were big sand dunes. The archaeological report said that sand dunes were 15 feet high or more, and the archaeological review that was done in I think it was the 1980s by Charlie Keao noted that local residents said that there were burials in this sand dune. But as the parks were built and so forth, it's like a lot of the history was lost. The Kamaole koa may have once overlooked a pond. It appeared that there was kind of a depressed wetland area right near it. It was filled in with trash when the library construction began, so they cleared all the trash out of it. But this is right next door. This part of Colombo Park is right next door to the library, and it has underground water and it has a drainage way. So there may have been a pond right there that that site overlooked. So you have to keep things in context. And we do know that behind the library, actually, some house site foundations were found all beneath the earth, and also several burials. A look at some of the traditional names in this area. There's Waimahaihai, it's a traditional name. The Ili, or the small land division here, was called Kavili Poa. And Kavili Lipoa is a type of limu or seaweed. And vili can mean twist or turn. So it might mean, the place where you could, find the seaweed all twisted up. And then, of course, Kalua Ihakoko is the ili that comes out right where Cove Park is, and it also applies to this gulch that goes right by the Monsanto facility. A lot of cultural sites have been recorded in this area, There's no one study that shows this, but if you piece together studies, every red dot is a ceremonial site, so it's a heiau or shrine or something. The green dots are agricultural sites, and the yellow dots are all habitation sites. So you see there was kind of a pattern here. People lived along the gulches, farmed along the gulches, lived down in the floodplains below the gulches, had use of the ocean. And there are some house sites that were recorded along the ocean as well, but of course you have so much more erosion with tsunamis and storms and everything when you're in the coastal zone. The rugged coastline there by Cove Park is connected to several famous ali'i, including the Prince Hakoko, who was the son of King Umi of the Big Island. There is a low rise right next to the, if you pull into where the Monsanto headquarters is and kind of go over a little bit north, there's a fence around this kind of open field. This had a tremendous deposit of cultural material called midden. And that would be shells, bones, tools, bits of coral, all evidence that people actually had quite an extensive habitation here. And so this was actually preserved, which is a rare thing. It's hard to find anything preserved Mauka of Pi'ilani Highway. But this high promontory is a preserved cultural site because it was probably a village of some sort, a small settlement. The neighborhoods between Kamaoli and Liliuoholu gulches, and Liliuoholu Gulch goes down to Kamaoli Point. You guys have all seen that ditch that comes down by Kamaoli Point. It erodes in the rain, but that area also is very rich in sites. And the red dots are, once again, these are heiau or shrines. Several got destroyed, of course, when Alanui Keali'i went in. And the yellow dots are, once again, habitation sites. So we know from cultural surveys and things that a number of people lived and worshipped in this area and probably fished right down here and launched their canoes. And just inland of Waimahaihai, there's a heiau site on the county park site right by the recycling center. It's a little vague. It's kind of on the crest of a hill. It's probably a boundary heiau between the marking the Ahupua'a boundary. This is kind of a closer shot. This is Keokea Gulch as it kind of winds its way down towards the ocean. And the heiau is a very disturbed site. It's an assemblage of stones, but it does have this upright stone. Has a tremendous amount of coral and other offerings on it. So when you have coral this far from the ocean, someone brought it there for a specific purpose, and usually it was to show that this was a site that had ceremonial importance. Great view plane. It might have had to do with fishing too. You could observe what's going on. And when Kamali'i School and the Keali'i Kai and Moana Estates and all these were built, there were cultural sites all in these different neighborhoods, but most of them were cleared for destruction and are gone. But one that does remain, this is near Kamali'i School, the little first subdivision behind Kamali'i School, and there's a heiau or koa, fishing koa. It's a nice little mound that's filled with pieces of coral, and the neighbors keep it up, and it's a respected place. Another kind of close-up view of the rock ahu or mound, and then the pieces of coral in it. So what we know is people lived here because they could fish. They could gather and fish from the sea just as we do today. Limu gathering was a huge part of the food source here, and many different varieties of limu grew in these waters. There's old-time reports where people in their land claims would actually mention the kind of limu they could gather near their land. By the mid-1800s, the majority of the Kamaoli lands were used as a royal cattle range. So the kings ran herds of cattle that they'd gotten from Westerners here. 29 individuals did file claims for lands in Kamaoli, which is the Ahupua'a, in when you from Waimahai on to Wailea. This was a big potato growing area during the gold rush, but more the upper lands up here were the potato growing areas, and the lower lands were for cattle. Also, a source, once the Kihei was introduced in the 1850s, by the turn of the century, leases were given by the government to gather Kihei wood on government land as well as crown lands for firewood, of course. Most of Kamaoli is still owned by the Haleakala Ranch company, and of course it has, been a grazing land for over 100 years. Little known fact, up above us, all the way up in Keokea, in Kula Uka, the upper Kula, a gentleman named Sun May owned the Kamaoli Cattle Ranch, and he was in the same ili, Kavili Lipoa, the same ili that's right there, down by Monsanto and all of those guys. His brother was the famous Sun Yat-sen, and he sold off his land in the early 1900s to help finance the Chinese Revolution that was successfully led by his brother. Some of you may have seen the Sun Yat-sen little memorial park that's up as you pass Grandma's Coffee House and drive out towards Lupalakua and the winery. And the Haleakala Ranch donated the site to have this memorial put up. Sun Yat-sen actually lived in Hawaii. He went to school in Honolulu. He went to Iolani School, and he also stayed with his brother a lot in Kula, in the Chinese community in Kula. Chinese immigrants actually bought a lot of land in a certain period. There were a number of very hardworking entrepreneurial Chinese immigrants like Sun May, and he was a major businessman. In fact, he took care of his son's family because their lives weren't worth much in China. The patriarch of the family, Sun Yat-sen, was a revolutionary, so his wife and children stayed with his brother in Kula. And the ranch was over 1,100 acres, and it's now owned by Bob Green, Oprah Winfrey's special personal trainer. So, little known tidbit. So we're fast forwarding a little bit. We went from 1900, now we're in the 1920s. Most of Kamaoli, so what we know is Cam 1, Cam 2, Cam 3, Parks, Charlie Young, all of this was crown or public lands until the 1920s. But no one seemed to have a lot of value put on the history of the area, so it was just seen as sort of empty lands that maybe the government could sell off and get some money for. So probably a lot of the history that goes with this is still yet to be uncovered because it's not on the surface. When we hit the 1970s and water got brought to Kihei, then development came. Starting in 1911, we had homesteads in Waiahuli and Keokea, and these eventually became the beachfront lots along Palama Street. But originally these were all larger homestead lots. Here's the Kihei Library, just for reference, and here's Welakahau Street. In the 1920s, the USGS maps showed more subdivisions, but you notice Kihei Road was just like a little trail here. And I have to say, I interviewed folks for my book on McKenna, and a couple of gentlemen were young men in the 20s. They were born in 1904, 1905. I got to interview them in their 90s. And they said, oh, there was no road in Kihei in those times. It was a trail you rode with your horse, and you couldn't take a car on it. You just, if you wanted to get to Kihei, you went up McKenna Landing, and you went up the road from McKenna Landing, and then you cut over, and there was a road that came down over here by Kalama Park, and you could either ride a horse or you had to walk. But basically, the automobiles stopped at the north end of Kihei where the plantation was. Next slide. The homesteads in 1925 went all the way to Keawakapu Beach. This is, where the Keawakapu community is today. This is Kamoli Point. And this is interesting enough. This is a government road, and it goes all the way up to Kula. We don't have that road today somehow. The 60s, before Pi'ilani Highway was built, by this time our homesteads were the lots along Halama, but still not too much going on, further down. It took the 70s to really bring the influx of subdivisions to Kihei. So here's a little statistics. In 1970, 547 full-time housing units, population 1,600. But by 1972, there were 8 proposed development projects. Just 2 years later, 50 acres, because they knew water was coming. And this was from a report that the state issued, that they were a little concerned that 50 acres was going to be developed. Many cultural sites were found, but only one was recommended for any kind of historic investigation. So we wonder why we don't have much history left of Kihei. It's pretty much because of this outlook. This is one of our most prominent families in Kihei, the Aquino Ohana, and their ancestors were the Thompsons, I think related to the Thompson Ranch up in Upper Kula. And they owned over 100 acres of land, mostly Malka, South Kihei Road, in the era around World War II. And they had a fishing fleet that located along the shoreline, what's today is Kalama Park, Cam 1, other fishing boats would be arrayed there. And this family was very generous. These were some of the parcels that they owned. They donated the land for the Mormon Church here in Kihei. The original location was right kind of across from the library in this area, and then now, of course, the Mormon Church is up on Ohana Street, I believe, up in above Kamole. This was the old Mormon Church. It's still a little building today, but this is Kahude Ka'alakea, and he used the church for his ministries in the 1980s. Next slide. This was a momentous occasion in the history of Kalama Park. Kalama Park was established in the 1900s, early 1900s, at the same time Maui County was, 1905, 1906. But it was used, the whole coastline was used for training during World War II. And after the war, they had some extra explosives left over. They had done some dynamiting during the war to make better landing approaches for the practice of the invasion, their landing craft. And everyone said, gee, it's so much nicer to swim now. We don't have these reefs in the way. So they actually blew up the reef off of Kalama Park. And this is an actual picture of it. Someone took a picture for the newspaper or something. And unfortunately, no one realized that the reefs really keep the sand on the beach. And so a lot of sand was lost gradually after this. And there were newspaper articles decrying this fact. I have some old articles from the 60s. Next slide. And so eventually, of course, the breakwater at Kalama had to go in because the land was being eaten away. I came across some articles that called Kalama Beach, this was from the 1920s and 30s, the Waikiki of Maui. So it had these broad white sand beaches at that time. Next slide. So our major gulches, carried water Makai to all these traditional settlements, but today they tend to carry debris. This is Kamoli area. This is the Kalua'i Hakoko Gulch that goes by the Monsanto facility, winds around through here, and comes out actually down by, where does it come down? By Cove Park, I think. And then there's the Kamoli Gulch, which is a big gulch, and it's surrounded by this lava flow and has quite a nice native plant habitat. This goes through the subdivisions by near Kamali'i School. And then you have Keokea Gulch that goes past the sewage treatment plant, goes past the north end of Monsanto, and it winds down through your neighborhood and comes down kind of ignominiously. It doesn't really have a complete discharge point there at the ocean. There's kind of like a little point that it floods into. But I'm sure RC will address that more. But this just kind of gives you the big picture that now these drainage ways that really were a source of life, now they're a source of trouble unless we do something to plan our watershed protection better. This is, I believe, Kamoli Gulch. Next slide, please. This is actually walking in the gulch. So this is, near a neighborhood, but we have these very natural places here. Next slide. They also have native trees like the willy trees and other native plants. Next slide. Nice rock formations. Next slide. And cultural sites like this cave area. Next slide. Other cultural sites. Next slide. All of the gulches have actually been proposed to be part of our green infrastructure. In other words, they've been proposed to be more than just drainage ways. They've been proposed to have walking trails and other sorts of things as part of them in our community plans. But as we move forward with our new community plan, we really need to make sure that that suggestion moves forward, because they are really amazing resources. Kamoli Gulch actually goes through county-owned land, so there was no reason that shouldn't be some sort of a wilderness preserve. The police station is taking up 10 acres of it, but it's a 50-acre site, and it's a beautiful hiking area. So this gives us a chance to have places where people can get good exercise, see beautiful things, and it also would give us a chance to preserve some of our history. Next slide. So we have much more history to uncover, and to plan our future, we need to understand our past. And fortunately, we have a lot of caring people here. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, Lucian. That was really compelling. I love the maps. We may come back to that with the red dot outline. Looks like Christmas. For ourselves, if we could actually have all those areas preserved for the community to walk and have a green belt, through our neighborhood would be great. Okay, we're going to have light here.
All right.
Wow.
The return of light, and we're going to switch over. And I guess for any questions, we're going to save questions for the end for everything.
We might have time for one while you're just finishing up. And does anybody have a question to Lucien while we're waiting for the next speaker?
Question or comment?
Where on those maps is that levee that we're talking about?
I'm going to talk about
RC's gonna, that's probably Keokea Gulch, and I didn't have in-depth pictures of that particular gulch, so I was counting on RC to bring you up to speed on that one.
And one interesting thing that did come out of the remapping of our district is that we cleaned the gulch in our neighborhood as part of a project and hauled out
Stuff you don't want to mention.
unbelievable things out of the gulch over 10 years. But now it's being renamed as the Waimahai Gulch. So we're just going to let that be because that's the name of our district and it's more appropriate. And the Keokea Gulch is sort of traveling down, towards where the water is going to be diverted. So that's sort of next we're going to have RC, who's going to talk about. He's got some more maps and some more things that he's going to show us that have to do with more specifics, I guess, about what is on the other side of the Piilani Highway and what that looks like. So I'll give you the microphone.
I got into this because I bumped up against the FEMA flood insurance about 2.5 years ago, and Dudley was my surveyor. But my house was well above the flood zone, so I thought, I should be out of it. But they convinced me I should be in it. Go ahead. You should always go to get something from a talk to take away with. This is very important. Most everybody remember if you don't want to drink downstream. Right now, all the water coming off the mountain is probably not drinkable. Next slide. If nothing changes at this point, will our neighborhoods get out of the flood zone, which was our real issue. The proposed map suggests that the vast majority of the people in the Waimea High District will get out of the flood zone. Now, the water that they said used to come into our neighborhood is actually diverted north and floods the people in the Lopoa area, or it comes south and comes through the Kalama Village area. And then what can we anticipate in terms of decreased damage if they do something, or what will happen if they don't? Next slide. The known risks to that gulch, it's called the Kihei Gulch. They're trying to rename it because of the issues related to the problems with it. It's one of the 4 gulches that were evaluated for flood control between 1950 and 1981. Last Maui County U.S. Corps of Engineers flood study was finished in 81. There's an estimated flow, and depend on how you look at the numbers, between 7,200 and 8,000 cubic feet per second per hour for 2 hours at maximum flood. And I'll show you that. But that's equivalent to the amount of water that came out of the Loka that flooded on Kauai in terms of total volume. But it's sort of like a flood on high dose Valium. It's really slowed down, but it's still a lot of flooding. That wave of water at maximum flood contains about between 4,500 and 500,000 pounds of water, if it's just water. Now it's going to contain dirt, cars, debris, rocks, and other things. So it's actually the momentum when this flood occurs at the 100-year flood is going to put a lot of downward pressure onto our community. At the boundary between the wastewater treatment plant and the Maui Tropical Algae Plant, there is an illegal, as best I can tell, abandoned and non-maintained diversion. Now that diversion is seen as being effective on public works flood maps, and it supposedly diverts that water westward through the Kihei Gulch Bridge. That bridge is rated at 12,000 cubic feet per second. All of this water is supposed to go that way. Now, when I looked at this, and I've asked my brother, who's one of the lead design engineers for the state of Nevada Highway Department, I gave him the measurements and procedures. We don't feel that that's adequate. Next slide. The other things are that about shortly after this diversion was put in place, it was the wastewater treatment plant was flooded, and I talked to Mayor Arakawa, and he described standing in the plant with the water up to his knees. Goodfellows, and since then they put a berm around the wastewater treatment plant to protect it from flooding. Goodfellows, who has a gravel crushing yards, also have berms around their site, and they've added a couple. They also may have, and we can't tell because they won't give us any of the data in terms of topography or previous engineering or anything, despite FOIA requests from the county to get the data. But there may be a spillway up right about the middle of the Monsanto properties on a dog leg that's sort of a natural dog leg that you see on the maps. There's only about 4 foot height maybe 5 foot height between the bottom of the gulch and the spillway. So if you put a massive amount of water down that gulch, it's going to push through the Monsanto.
Is that the definition of a spillway then?
Well, yeah, basically they're designed to handle overflow.
Okay.
And then the earth at Monsanto, just like any farm, has been basically graded, smoothed, and cleared. Next slide. When I started this, the planning or floodplain manager denied that there was a diversion and denied to Dudley that there was a diversion. I've been dealing with the corporate attorneys because they say I'm trying to sue them, but we're not suing them. They won't give us any information out in terms of topography, engineering, data, and they say they're not culpable for anything that's happened up there. We've been unable to locate the funding for this diversion. There are no permits, There are no inspection records. There is no TMK easement for this diversion. The mapping data and FEMA data that's currently being used by planning does not represent what in fact is on the ground. Next slide. The current diversion, when you compare it to what the Corps of Engineers and county talked about, is the least safe option in terms of diverting the water. The county would have been better off just leaving the gulch coming down into our community and building around the flooding. Haleakala Ranch, I've talked to their manager several times, and they denied pretty enthusiastically that they had any knowledge of this. They didn't know it was there. They didn't build it, and there is no paper trail at TMK or anywhere that shows that this diversion is related to the Gulf or the Haleakala Ranch, but it's on a little keyhole of property that goes through there. You know, until new accurate maps are issued, the FEMA may continue to force payment of flood insurance. That flood insurance costs the community, the district, $200,000 to $400,000 a year now in flood insurance that we really shouldn't be paying if the county had built this according to the agreement that they made with the Hawaii Department of Transportation. Through the Corps of Engineers, they never obtained a stream channel alteration. When you change the water from one stream bed to another stream bed, you're required to apply for it. And the FOIAs that I've gotten from the Public Works Planning Facility from the Kihei Bridge said that they facilitated the building of the Kihei Gulch Bridge, which is just beyond Hope Chapel, and the other side of this, which is what the diversion is. Next slide. All of this started in 1972. If you go up the mountain, this is actually sort of a nice little U-shaped, straight little channel for the most part as you get down off the hill. The side of it, the high point of it is probably 100, 150 yards from one side to the other. This probably would handle a 70, 80 year flood within its channel. A 100-year flood is going to be flooding around the outside of this next slide. Now this is the diversion that the Manihunis built. This is 20 feet across at the top, 8 feet deep, and 8 feet across the bottom. You can see it goes down to bedrock here. And most of the time, since we don't usually get big floods, this actually diverts the water westward, and it does a fairly efficient job. Next slide. This is 8,200 cubic feet of water. I'm not standing on the middle of the bridge when I took this. This is the Rogue River. The diversion, you know, if you want to double this and put it out here, is about that big. This is a tremendous volume of water, and that's the numbers that the Corps of Engineers gave. Even if you want to go 7,000 cubic feet, I don't care. We're still talking a lot of water, and that water will go wherever it wants to. Next slide. Here's the 1950 archives map that I have, and there are two main flood courses. One is in the Lili'iholo drainage here. The other one is in the Kihei drainage, which comes down and used to come into, like Lucianne described, basically this big wetlands, and then it would be percolated through and leave, and it would save all this was then nutrients as opposed to mud. And the area here, and here's a test for a lot of you guys are sort of years old. How many people remember going to the beach in 1970, 1968 and snorkeling? Does anybody here? Do you remember the colored fish in the water? The coral's gone, the fish are gone, and we've been doing something to this. There's no fish left here to make a sustainable fishery. Something's happened to this fishery in the last 50 to 70 years, which has been devastating to it. Next slide. This is a topo map that came, I believe, from planning. I'm not exactly sure where it is. It's an aerial map with topo lines on top of it. This was done in 2011. This is the wastewater treatment plant. You can see that they now, at this point, 2011, have a berm and wall here to keep this water from flowing down here. This is the area where the Kihei composting is. The Maui tropical algae plant is here. You can see the portions of the Monsanto facility there, and this is Goodfellows. Next slide. Right, don't go, hold your finger. If you look at this, this suggests that nothing has changed from the 1955 map. They're stating at this point that this water comes down into our neighborhood. This is a public map that was produced for our community, and it basically all the way up till 2011, and then I'll show you 2012, the planning department, floodplain planning department of this county basically created falsified maps. The other thing that's interesting about this is, you know, if you're in the military and you look at something, you look for things that aren't there. This map has been scrubbed of its topo lines over here where the diversion is to make it invisible. The other thing they've done, this has always been Kihei Gulch. They're now starting to rename it because the public works maps show this as Waimahai Gulch, and they show the thing that they've been using from 1970 as Kihei Gulch, which is actually the next gulch over. It's a little small lower mountain gulch. Next slide. So what actually has happened? In 1972, they were in the throes of beginning to put the community together to develop this community. They had the power in place, they're getting the water in place, but when you have all those things, you need a place to poop. So they had to build their wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant was 95% federal grant money. And then the green baddies in Washington put in the Clean Water Act in 1972. The plans and everything were already in place to build the wastewater treatment plant. So they were either going to have to repeat their EIS or figure out some way around this. And the only solution that I can come to, and I'm not sure I'm right because I can't get any information in the county, is they elected to basically submit paperwork that was not correct in terms of what they were planning to do. Because they started this planning in 65 to 68 when they determined how to basically subdivide the whole Kihei area and Waimahai and Wailea. All this was all based on if you had power and water and sewage, you could develop. You couldn't develop before that. So, and what's happened? They had to put the berm around the plant because their original diversion didn't work. They got berms around Goodfellows. They got a possible spillway up above. And I don't know whether this is natural or not, but if it flows, all that water goes across farmland that's been plowed and is level. And then to handle some of this, they put some additional drainage culverts into the road to handle the stuff coming down from the plant. Next one. Now here's the 2012 FIS, which is Flood Information Survey data that was, and the map that was generated from it, that was sent in as being correct and signed off as being correct by the county. It shows our neighborhood as being in a significant flood zone. So when you look at this, this is a revenue source for FEMA because it's never going to flood because the water should be going this way. And it also represents a way of covering what was done here because they had to get some way. I think what happened is they did this and then nobody was willing to take the bag for it. But you know, this whole neighborhood here is no longer in the flood zone on the new maps. There's some flooding here that they now acknowledge on the new map, which is probably related to what they've done here, the fields and stuff. And Dudley can talk about that. Next slide. Now, here is your test for line. This is a LiDAR map. This is one of the three sections. The section here somehow got corrupted, which goes through the diversion, and the other section down below got corrupted. But this is a LiDAR. It shows actually structures sort of reversed.
Is that what LiDAR stands for?
It's low incidence direct angled radar, or something like that. But basically, it's a very high resolution map that you can take the data from this and then make really good topo maps, and you can figure out your hydraulics from. These things are actually, these are gullies. They look like they're elevated just because of the way map generated. So this is the gully that comes off beside, or, I'm sorry, this is the one that comes into Kalama Park. This one goes down beside the farms, and then this one has flooded in the past fairly severely. It was in 2012, 2010. Dudley, remember when this flooded? This one? Is it?
By the point station.
Anyway, but this floods somewhat here. But this map shows that here's the dog leg where we think that the spillway is. You notice that this said no. This map just describes this as Kihei Gulch. I think I don't have my glasses. It's hard to see. Next slide. And I don't have if you have really sophisticated equipment, you can take these things and you can do subtraction maps to figure out what's going on. But this is what I've been able to figure out in terms of how the water goes. This little green arrow up here is how Public Works says all the water goes. It comes down to this little diversion and heads that way. But it really doesn't, because this will overflow at maximum floods. It's got to decompress here, which goes across, or should decompress here where it goes across the fields, and will scour these fields clean because they're just farm fields. You also have floodwater that comes here because we know they built this to try and protect the plant. That water goes around it and goes across the street, and when the debris clogs up the drain that's there, then it floods these houses. The flooding water from here goes into this drain. This comes down through the Kalama Villages area out onto the street. And FEMA now says that the area, this water actually goes down through that area, turns westward, goes up South Kihei Road, and then turns down Waimahai Street and floods my street. So I'm still in the flood zone in my front house, even though all the water that comes there was probably diverted by the county. Or at least some of it. Next slide. So what are the real risks? I mean, because my talk is really about flooding and what's going to come into our community. The risks are movable. Whatever naturally flows downhill from all the way up the Kihei area, Kula, you're talking old cars, trees, stumps, dead cows, whatever's actually in the ditch or can wash into the ditch. And then there's whatever else has been put in there by us. So next slide. At the Kihei wastewater complex, and this sucker is really important to us because if it goes down, there's no place on this side of the island to poop. This is a really important infrastructure. They break, just like planes fall down. You know, and what happens when it breaks? If we're lucky, it's all sort of contained in the plant. If it's not, and the pumps are still on from Wailea and Mailai and stuff, it goes down into our neighborhood. So this plant needs to be pretty well protected. I talked to the engineer, and he said he thought that it was at this point, and we shouldn't get any more. Early on, they had some spills, and they think that they've corrected that. And then, if this floods, and we have to talk about the Kihei composting in this, or just the natural flood path that's there, you have chemicals, toxins, and biological stuff that is going to push downhill. Next slide. Now, here is a map, and I don't know whether you noticed on the other maps. This is the Kihei composting area. This, at this point, has been filled up, I'm guessing, since 2008, 2010. Is that about right? Craig's, or JD's here. JD, when did they start this? What? Huh? Anyway, he may have gone. Anyway, they started filling this up. They have huge piles of compost here. That is just like floating vegetation mass to a big flood. It'll pack this stuff up and then push it into the plant, and those waters, instead of going around the plant, they go through the plant, or they'll push everything that would have gone through the plant into both the drainage. And this is the old Waimahai drainage here. That right now is only rated at 333 cubic feet per second for maximum handling. This is actually a wastewater management plant, or what do you want, or waste plant management in my hometown. They basically take the stuff in, grind it up, whatever they can use, and sell the stuff, and then they take the rest of the stuff and actually burn it, and they have a biofuel plant. This, if we get the correct hydraulics and mapping and topography, may be an issue. The Goodfellows are also a little bit worried about what will happen if this basically pushes their way. Next slide. Now, over to the side, and there's the golf course, and if the golf course has, I mean, it's got a monoculture of grass. You get a monoculture of grass by putting down herbicides and fungicides, and then they put lots and lots of water on it. It's got the effluent essentially mixed out of the plant onto the grass. It's a nice looking course, but all that, there's only like about 4 to 6 inches of dirt. That water then comes down through there, and it's got to go somewhere because it'll hit the lava. So it flows down, and if you swim in the ocean, you can feel these little cool things coming up, like especially, one of the places you can feel them is at the McKenna Beach Landing. When you come in, you can feel these little areas. That's basically a lot. Some of that's our local effluent, just getting there ahead of the stuff coming off the mountain. But it's been treated, but it's high. It's whatever's in that water when they put it on the golf courses. The Goodfellows, and I talked to their risk guy, and he's very helpful. They have explosives that technically could be washed away, but they're within blast berms, and and they're designed so that the water won't push anything out of there. They do have some chemical toxins, hazardous material. He said that was all mock trailers. The trailers are up in the ground, and their site is elevated. That stuff shouldn't come into our community. I think that the Goodfellows yard is not a risk to our community. Next. And then we have the Monsanto fields. And this is sort of a lightning rod right now for the community and many members of the community. And really, what are the risks? They do use broadleaf defoliants, they use herbicides, they use some insecticides, and they have GMO plants there. If you look at the volume that they use of this stuff, it's probably pretty close to what's going on to the golf courses, maybe even less. The GMO issue, I don't know that that's been resolved now. I think it's something you should be concerned about. Somebody, if the Seralini, and there's a good paper by Seralini out of France that did long-term studies on GMO ingested into rats and stuff, that raises some doubts. But I'm not sure if that, we have a lot of granola people in Ashland, and I always listen to them and just sort of. But I think it's a legit. If the Seralini paper is correct, it's probably a legitimate thing that needs to be examined. And it's pretty clear what's going to happen with the Monsanto fields in terms of if that dog leg blows out. Now, when I looked at the maps, I couldn't see any, but when on my tour of the place yesterday, they pointed out that in 2010, 11 to 12, they upgraded everything. They've got fairly, in between all the fields, they've got basically drainage pathways. And they're no more than 100 yards, 150 yards apart. They've got retention basins that you can see. I would have added another one at the bottom of the field, one of their fields, but they've made a real effort to improve their place. Next slide. So this is what it looks like. I mean, the fields are sort of, they do cover crops, but this time of year there's not much in the way of cover crops. This is the dog leg. That area right there is only about 4 feet above the ditch. It's sort of wide there, but if you put a lot of water through there, I'm pretty sure it's going to overflow. This is the other ditch. It probably picks up some or a lot of the sediments that come off, and we're in this down here. There is a drainage channel through the center of the place that comes down and goes into this area, and then there's some other smaller drainage areas that come into here. All those, because this is a farming area that does not have, and because this has got to be square plots. It basically is they're doing scientific work. The fields have to be square. They can't really be contoured. So that's a slight downside. But they're doing everything they can to protect their soil. They only have about 8-9 inches up there, and they're really worried about losing it. Next slide. Uphill, I didn't have the resources or the time to look at what's hill. Uphill, there's a 1.4 square mile catchment area. But all you have to do is look in your ditches beside you, and whatever's up there is what's going to come down the hill. Next slide. And there are a cluster of issues. We don't know what regulations, procedures are in place, plans are in place for the county, state to reduce the flood risk to Kihei. There are some things that they could do that could stop all the flooding in this community with just a little money. And they had 3 chances to do it in the past and didn't. We've now been built up all this urban area down below, and that urban area, because of the FEMA flood insurance, because of the floods on the mainland, is going to be just a cancer in terms of money. All that money is going to be drained out of our communities that we could have spent here, and it's going to go to the mainland to take care of the flooding issues there. And then the other thing that'd be interesting, and I don't know what they are, what procedures are in place to monitor soil chemical levels and how they're really returning, or I guess, and the other thing I'd really like to see is, I don't know that this is an issue because I'm not sure what you do with the golf course if you want to return it to its natural state, but how you return the lands that they're using to their natural state. And thank you, I hope that was helpful.
Could someone turn the lights? Wow, and we've always wondered that, so I think now we know. We know what's around us, we know what's in our backyard, we know what to be concerned about. Should I sleep with one eye open?
It's a 1 to 100 odds. What the hell?
1 to 100, I hope it's more. I guess that's really the question, is how concerned should we be? My bigger question is what sort of maintenance, thank you. What sort of maintenance are we doing on our current floodways and gulches that is coming down the mountain? Because I think that seems, unfortunately, Robin couldn't be here tonight. She had a family emergency, but one of the things that was discussed, you remember, Dudley, I guess I'll pose a question to you. We were talking at the FEMA meeting about these ditches and floodways that get clogged up and that they require maintenance, do they not? Because talk to me like a third grader. I really don't know what has to happen in order to keep them, open and clear.
What happens is if there's a drainage easement or drainage way in the backyard, a lot of people use that as putting their debris in the backyard. One of the things we've been doing when we're doing the surveys, when my guys notice this, what we do is we noted that this could be a cause of a flood downstream, somebody below. Because if it backs up and then it let loose at one time, it could take another, flood out the other houses below. So keeping that floodways clear is very important. It's not being followed up, not quite as we should have it. We had the Crater Road where I lived. They were throwing all the debris, Christmas trees, whatever, in the gulches. And what happened back in 2008, 2007, we had a flood, and basically they were redoing the road and trying to redo the culverts, and the culverts was not quite to the standard that the older generation put together for the roads. And what happened is they had floods. They almost lost the road up on Crater Road. They had water going right through. One filled, the next one filled, the next one filled, and we had a river. It was like 2 feet of water going right, following the Crater Road, going right down and then going into different people's houses. We had one house that was flooded, and I told them that was. When I called the state and recommended that they get some sandbags because tomorrow could be another disaster again, we took pictures, we had a video and everything about this, but they said it's a fluke. Well, the next day it went into that guy's house where I told him that the sandbags were supposed to have gone, and it was like, I called him up and I said, I didn't want to tell you I told you so, but hey.
Do you know if there's any county funds, or is there a regular maintenance program, trucks that go around that do the cleaning for those ravines and gulches? Because I know as a neighborhood association, we figured, okay, let's try and get it done, and we decided, hey, let's just do it ourselves. And we just got together, and He-Man Landscaping just donated a truck. It was amazing, and we had these people show up, and the amount of debris that you can haul out of there is phenomenal. But if it backs up, you're saying this is happening up in Kula, and let's say somebody throws their Christmas trees and a bunch of stuff up there, and then that stuff either clogs up or comes tumbling down the hill at us, and that's one of the biggest issues.
Yeah, we had, what happened is they cleared out a lot of wattle trees above the upper Kula Road. And what happened with that is they just threw it, dropped the trees, leave the trees. Trees was in the waterways. We almost lost a nice bridge right by the Kula Botanical Gardens. Well, my dad lost some goats below there because what happened is that flood water came down and the goats is on the cliffs on the side, and that water just took them for a ride and they're gone. And that debris ends up, it on that same storm, it came across to the Kill Gouges, and that's where you had one of the houses was kind of drifting away going downstream. That one was floating boat type house. So,
wow. So the best thing we could hope for would be to maybe mention to Maui County Council the next time they have a public works meeting and they allocate funds that right now there are no funds to clean these gulches out and maintain them. Does anybody? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, when you do that, what they're going to do is the people that live along those gulches, it's their responsibility. I live along Kihei Gulch, and I have half of my back. I had to put a retaining wall to isolate my property from the gulch, but I'm still responsible to clean the gulch. I am responsible, and my neighbor across the other side of the gulch, we share it. But we only
So in other
share
words,
that.
even though it's a public easement and you don't
It's
own
not
it.
a public, it's an easement on my property. I have to take care of it.
Okay,
And
that's
they
very
send you a
interesting.
notice to do it.
Susan.
Well, first of all, I want to thank RC and Lucienne. I missed major of your talk, but the fact that citizens in the community are coming out and trying to figure out what to do and doing this amazing research that you both presented is just really wonderful, because the county clearly isn't doing that. My experience, I live in Maui Meadows, but my experience is that people fill the gulches, they trim their yards, and they don't want to bother taking it to the landfill, so they throw it in the gulch. And people, you can call, I can't remember now whether it's the fire department or the county, somebody else in the county, and report, and they can go, they have...
Yeah, that is the fire department, because
And
it's
then-
a fire hazard.
And then they go out and they tell the people, that they have to clear it, or I think they can eventually take a lien off on their land. Now, I don't think it's ever gotten that
There
far,
have been
but that is...
experiences, I know, that the fire department will come out and they will cite individuals when it's clear that they've been making a huge compost heap in their own backyard for years and that they're not cleaning it up. So that's a good suggestion for us to sort of police our own neighbors and our own neighborhood to make sure that they're... Yes, sir.
Just, the county has, for the last 5 years, been promising to produce something called the Kihei Master Drainage Plan.
The Kihei Master Drainage Plan. That's been a promissory gift then. Okay.
Harry Hecht and I met with Gladys Weisse last January on that subject, and from David Good, we were informed that a consultant was working on it, and it would be out by spring or summer
Of
So now-
2014?
of this year.
Okay.
And so it's still not out. And when I asked Public Works at the candidates or at the meeting we had with all the departments up at the community center, I learned that it's still not done, and she wouldn't give me a date as to when it will be done. But I think when it eventually is done, if ever, that's the time when the whole community can kind of rise up and say, let's put some real energy on getting this to be what it should be. And I hope that will happen before the Kihei community plan process, which is still a couple of years out. But that's another chance for us.
And
to
repeat
get
for
involved in
us
that.
older folk who don't remember, it's the Kihei Master Drainage Plan
Correct.
Program. Or
It's a plan. It's a
the
document
plan.
that's under
Okay,
development.
so maybe, during this election year, we could be asking Maui County Council and the people, that are developing that, like, how's it going?
It's the mayor,
It's the mayor's department. Okay.
Public Works.
Public Works. So you would write the mayor and ask him?
You
Where
bug
the heck
Public
is it?
Works?
And Public Works. Okay.
You probably, it's gonna take a while. You guys have a lot to learn about how the system works and what the resource.
No, it's
it's good, it's important what
Yeah.
you're doing. But there's a lot of information available, even old subdivisions have topo maps associated with them. Those documents, you can just walk into subdivisions and, you know, find the TMK and look for it. There's a lot of information available, but you're gonna have to stay engaged to get it. You can't expect to send a letter and get a response.
I see.
You
So
know,
we have
I
to
mean,
really.
just some request. You may
Well,
get
I'd
one,
imagine if this
but-
video plays at Akaku, I don't know, 50 or 60 times, that's
No.
some engagement.
You have to stay engaged and follow up and ask for meetings with the department heads. There's a resource library at planning department, and you should be able to request documents from them. They're usually pretty good to get.
Well,
you
I think we've been
documents.
promised a document, right? A specific document, and it
Yeah.
really just clamoring and asking for that. I think it really, if we could, that sounds like a great goal. Is to say, let's get that. Let's get that consensus. It looks like they've been doing that for many years.
The
So,
only body who works at Talent Consulting, they're the ones who are doing it.
Tawa Consulting.
Powell?
R.M.
Towler.
Towler.
R.M.
Yeah,
Towler,
Towler.
Oh, in Honolulu.
Yeah.
Oh,
And they
okay.
have lots of historical
Yeah.
aerial photography.
RC has a comment on what you were saying.
In doing this research, I have tried to get stuff out of RM Tal, but they say it's proprietary and you have
Pay
to.
for it.
Well, I don't mind paying for it. I've been doing this all out of my pocket.
Yeah.
But they won't give me it because they say the county owns it. When I go to the county said, okay, but they never give permission to RM Tal to give me the maps that we need. Also, I am so radioactive at the county that Patrick Wong has sent a letter to the council as well as the department heads that nobody should talk to me.
Send another liaison.
I have sent several FOIAs, probably about 15 or 20, which have an obligation by the county to answer them, and they have not. That is currently sitting at OIP, and I'm hoping to get a court order to open up the county.
Wow. Now you know who you're talking to up here. Very good. We've got about 2 more minutes left. And before we close, is any more questions about? I have one really, and that is about the change in our reef with the rainwaters coming through and the brown water. And what is the best way for us to keep the brown water from spilling out, from our communities into the oceans? Maybe Lucienne can answer that for me, because we experienced that this last rain, and there's sharks out there, and it's just.
Well, the short answer, and we have Larry Stevens here, who is chair of the Maui Marine Resource Council Clean Water Committee. But the short answer is you need to slow down and detain that water before it gets near the ocean. You need to start dealing with the problem, Mauka, upslope. Have places where the water can be absorbed, and if it crosses over the Pi'ilani Highway, we need to restore some of the wetland capacity. These should be conditions, mitigating conditions for developments upslope. Should need to buy land downslope and make areas. I'm sorry Robin isn't here because we have this whole watershed plan. A lot of people put effort into it. It addresses exactly these topics, and there's a lot of good information in it.
Yes, Susan.
I just have a question. I don't know who has the answer, but this year, when I first moved here 26 years ago, South Kihei Road was full of potholes all winter long. By spring it was potholes. Things have changed because we've been in drought for so many years. People forget how wet it can be here. This year, of course, is wetter again. And I'm wondering what anybody knows about the climate change ideas of, I know that the trades are going to go, I know that the bog will get worse because there aren't the trades, but I haven't really heard a lot about the rain and all that. Does anybody? Because, that's another sort of
Susan, you
reason
really
to
think
make
we're going
it-
to do climate change in the last minute of the program? Yes.
I have a question related. It hasn't been covered exactly. It was touched on when RC was talking about those cool freshwater springs that are flowing out all along the coastline. So the gulches don't flow often, even in the rain. They don't go all the way to the sea. But you know, once the people that understand the hydrology of the entire catchment area, aren't there freshwater streams going down through the lava strata constantly flowing? You may not see them on the surface, but below ground there's like a constant conveyor belt of water going from high ground to low ground. So even if there's a rain up country, or let's just say some of those more toxic areas up country or upslope, is it reasonable to assume that anything on the surface, say a golf course or whatever, goes down and is constantly being transported to the ocean, plus the injection wells up slope? It's like a river you don't see, constantly delivering water to the ocean, like a fast tracking anything upslope to the ocean. We should be worried about that too, not just flood times.
Yeah, we have our hands full. And speaking of having our hands full, we need to close the room for the cleaners. But I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I know we all ask ourselves, can you make a difference? And I really feel that you have. The people sitting in this room took the time out of their lives to come down and listen to information that can impact your community. It's really important that you do listen and that you share this information, what you saw and heard tonight, with other people. The best way you can do that is go to our website, waimahaihai.org, or also check in with Akaku's programming and see when this program is going to be scheduled and share it with a friend. There's a lot of things you can do in terms of writing to the mayor's office and checking in with your county councilman, asking them the important questions, asking them when this plan is going to be delivered. Because if they know you're watching and you're paying attention, then that springs them into action. So that's my hope for the Kihei community, and I thank you for coming, and have a good night.